Welcome back to Earthly Delights, my fellow garden lovers and soil explorers. Today we are turning our attention to the true star of the summer vegetable garden, the tomato. If you have ever poured your time, effort, and care into tomato plants, only to wonder why the harvests still look disappointing, cracked, or weak, then this is a lesson worth staying with. Let me share something from my own garden. Last summer, I harvested just over 90 pounds of ripe, beautiful tomatoes from only 4 plants in one raised bed. But the year before, using the same varieties in the same bed, under the same sun, I barely reached 30 pounds. The soil had not changed, the seeds had not changed, the sunlight had not changed. The only real change was the way I watered. That one quiet adjustment transformed my tomato patch from a frustrating mess of split fruit and blossom end rot into the most productive tomato harvest I had ever grown. And here's the surprising part. The watering mistake that may be quietly destroying your tomato harvest right now is probably not simple underwatering. It is not simple overwatering either. It is a much more specific habit, one so common in home gardens that many of us never stop to question it. Today, we are going to look beneath the surface, into the soil and into the science of how tomatoes really grow. We will talk about root behavior, deep watering, the wisdom behind ancient irrigation methods, and even the powerful lessons of dry farming. By the end, you will understand how to water tomatoes in a way that supports stronger roots, healthier fruit, and a much bigger harvest. And along the way, you may also see how growth, in the garden and in life, often depends on building strength deep below the surface. Let's get our hands dirty. Part 1. The grand illusion of the daily sprinkle. Let's begin with a familiar habit that happens in gardens everywhere. Every evening, often right after dinner, many caring gardeners step outside with a hose, give each tomato plant what feels like a helpful splash of water, and feel satisfied that the job is done. The leaves still look green, the top of the soil turns dark and moist, and it seems like we are being careful, responsible plant parents. But the real question is this: what is happening below the surface? Most home gardeners water their tomatoes every day, but only a little at a time. And because they see wet soil on top, they believe they are helping the plant. In truth, they may be doing the opposite. That shallow daily watering slowly weakens the plant, limits root development, and sets the stage for many of the tomato problems gardeners struggle with all season. When water only reaches the upper layer of soil, the roots learn to stay there, gathering in the top 2 or 3 inches, where the moisture appears most often. That creates a serious weakness. Shallow roots cannot manage water well when heat and dry weather arrive. The top layer of soil may be soaked at 6 in the evening, but by the middle of the next day, the sun can dry it out completely. The plant is then pushed through a stressful cycle. Wet, dry, again and again. And that unstable rhythm is often what causes the real damage. It also gives us something deeper to think about. In the garden and in life, if we only deal with problems on the surface, giving them a quick splash of attention, do we ever build the strength to survive the dry seasons? Strong growth does not come from staying shallow. To grow stronger, we have to go deeper. Part 2. The hidden world beneath our feet. Tomato roots' true potential. To really understand how a tomato plant should be watered, we have to look at where it came from. Tomatoes evolved in the dry valleys of South America, and their entire growth system is built to search for water below the surface. This is something many gardeners overlook. When a mature tomato plant is grown properly, its roots can reach 2 to 3 feet down into the soil. So we should never treat a tomato like a fragile little houseplant. This is a strong, deep-rooted fruit-producing plant with a natural ability to handle dry conditions when its roots are trained correctly. When we water only the surface, we work against that natural design. Many soils, especially silt and clay soils, can hold a surprising amount of moisture deeper down, far below the top 6 inches that we usually see and touch. When we water deeply but less often, slowly giving a full gallon or 2 at the base of each plant, that moisture has time to move down 12 to 18 inches into the soil. That is when the deeper roots finally get the drink they need. Then, when the top layer of soil dries out a day or 2 later, the plant is encouraged to send its roots downward in search of more moisture. Over time, those roots become deeper, stronger, and much more dependable. Instead of training the plant to panic during dry weather, you are training it to become drought tough. And there is a powerful lesson in that. How often do we try to protect ourselves, or the people we care about, from every small difficulty, only to keep our roots shallow? Sometimes the drying surface is exactly what pushes growth deeper. A strong foundation is not built in the easy, shallow layer of life. It is built down in the depths where strength has to be earned. Part 3. The Calcium Conundrum and Blossom End Rot. Now let's talk about one of the most frustrating sights in the tomato harvest. You watch a healthy green tomato grow, you wait for it to ripen, and just when you think it is ready, you turn it over and find a dark, sunken, leathery patch on the bottom. That problem is called blossom end rot, and almost every tomato grower has faced it at some point. For a long time, gardeners have been told that blossom end rot means the soil does not have enough calcium. So we add calcium products, crush eggshells, mix up homemade sprays, and try all kinds of quick fixes. But many times, the problem still comes back. Here is the truth I have learned from years of working with soil and plants. Blossom end rot is rarely caused by a true lack of calcium in the soil. More often, it is a calcium delivery problem. In simple terms, the calcium may already be there, but the plant cannot move it properly because the moisture level is not steady. Calcium does not move freely around the plant like some other nutrients. It travels upward through the plant's vascular system, the xylem, carried by the flow of water during transpiration. When a tomato fruit is developing, it needs a steady supply of both water and calcium to build strong cell walls. But if the plant suddenly goes dry, that water flow slows down or stops. When that happens, calcium cannot reach the growing fruit at the moment it is needed most. The result is weak, collapsing cells at the blossom end of the tomato, and that is what creates the black, rotting patch we see. So the real key to reducing blossom end rot is not chasing every calcium supplement on the shelf. The key is better water management. And there is a useful lesson in that. Sometimes we think we are missing the basic ingredients for success, when in reality, those resources may already be present. What is missing is the steady, consistent flow needed to deliver them where they matter most. Part 4. The heartbreak of the split tomato. Just as discouraging as blossom end rot is the problem of tomatoes splitting and cracking. You walk into the garden after a heavy summer storm, expecting to find beautiful, nearly ripe fruit, and instead you see tomatoes burst open with deep cracks running down from the stem, or circular splits forming around the top. So what causes that sudden damage? Once again, it usually comes back to inconsistent moisture. When a tomato plant goes through a dry period and then suddenly receives a large amount of water from heavy rain or overwatering, the fruit takes in water too quickly. The inside of the tomato expands faster than the outer skin can stretch. As that internal pressure builds, the skin simply cannot hold anymore, and it splits. Those cracks may seem like only a cosmetic problem at first, but they do much more than spoil the look of the fruit. They open the tomato up to insects, fungal spores, and bacteria, which can quickly turn a good harvest into rotting fruit. The solution is to create a steady baseline of moisture in the soil. And to do that, we have to stop guessing. The top inch of soil is not a reliable guide because it can dry out quickly under the sun, even when the soil several inches below is still perfectly moist. Use the finger test. Push your index finger straight down into the soil near the plant, about 3 to 4 inches deep, or roughly to the second knuckle. If the soil feels cool and lightly damp, like a wrung-out sponge, leave it alone. Do not water yet. But if it feels dry all the way down, then it is time to water deeply. When you check what is really happening below the surface, you can avoid the dry then flooded cycle that tears tomatoes apart. In the garden, just like in life, steady and consistent care will always do more good than sudden bursts of effort, followed by neglect. Part 5. Rain from the wrong clouds. The danger of overhead watering. Now that we understand how much water tomatoes need and how often they should receive it, we need to talk about something just as important: how that water reaches the plant. Natural rain can be a gift to the garden. It rinses dust from the leaves, brings small amounts of atmospheric nitrogen, and soaks moisture deep into the soil. But when we copy rain the wrong way, blasting tomato plants from above with a sprinkler or a hose wand, we can create serious trouble. Tomatoes do not like sitting with wet leaves. When the foliage stays damp, especially when water splashes soil up onto the lower branches, it creates ideal conditions for fungal diseases. Problems like early blight, septoria leaf spot, and the feared late blight often begin this way. Late blight, caused by Phytophthora infestans, becomes especially dangerous when cool temperatures and high humidity come together. It can create purple-brown, greasy-looking patches on the leaves and stems, and under the right conditions, it can move fast enough to ruin an entire tomato crop in just a few days. If tomato leaves stay wet for around 10 hours in those conditions, infection can begin. So the rule I always come back to is simple. Water the soil, not the plant. Aim the water directly at the base of the stem and let it soak down into the root zone where the plant can actually use it. Keep the leaves as dry as possible, and when you can, water early in the morning. A window between 6 and 9 a.m. is ideal because the soil has time to absorb moisture before the day gets hot, and any accidental splashes on the leaves can dry quickly in the morning light. Evening watering, on the other hand, can leave foliage damp through the night, giving fungal spores the perfect chance to settle in. Feed the plant at its foundation. Keep the canopy dry, open, and able to enjoy the sun. That simple habit can prevent more tomato problems than many gardeners realize. Part 6. The Power of the Blanket. Why mulch is your garden's unsung hero. If deep watering is the action that gives tomato plants strength, then mulch is what protects that strength. In my experience, adding a good layer of mulch is one of the most powerful and practical things you can do in a tomato garden. Once your plants are established and the soil has warmed properly, spread 2 to 3 inches of organic mulch across the root zone. Clean straw, shredded leaves, or untreated grass clippings all work well. This simple layer does far more than make the garden look tidy. A good mulch can greatly reduce evaporation from the soil surface, helping the moisture you worked so hard to deliver stay where the roots can use it. On extremely hot summer days, mulch acts like a protective blanket over the soil, keeping the root zone much cooler and reducing heat stress on those delicate feeder roots. It also protects the plant from disease in a very practical way. During heavy rain, bare soil can splash up onto the lower leaves, carrying fungal spores and other pathogens with it. Mulch creates a barrier between the soil and the plant, lowering the chance of that contaminated splash reaching the foliage. And as organic mulch slowly breaks down, it feeds the living soil. It supports microbes, improves soil structure, and helps create the kind of rich, active earth that tomatoes love to grow in. In my own garden trials, tomato plants grown with mulch needed about half as much water as plants growing in bare soil, and they produced noticeably more fruit. That is the power of protecting the root zone. In many ways, mulch is the garden's healthy boundary. It holds moisture, moderates temperature, shields the plant from stress, and quietly supports growth from the ground up. Part 7. The Extreme Edge. Dry farming and the pursuit of concentrated flavor. Now let's step beyond the ordinary backyard garden for a moment and look at one of the most extreme forms of tomato water management: dry farming. In Mediterranean-style climates, especially in parts of Italy and along California's central coast, some growers have learned how to raise tomatoes with almost no added irrigation after the plants are established. Once the young tomato plants have settled in and begun growing strongly, the extra water is cut off. From that point on, the plants must survive on the moisture stored deep in the soil from the winter rains. To do that, tomato roots are forced to travel far below the surface, sometimes reaching more than 2 meters down in search of water. This kind of growing is not about maximum size or maximum yield. In fact, dry farm tomato plants usually produce fewer fruits, and those fruits are often smaller. But here's where it becomes fascinating. Because the fruit is not swollen and diluted by constant extra water, the flavor becomes much more concentrated. The sugars, acids, aromatic compounds build into a tomato that tastes rich, sweet, complex, and deeply satisfying. That is why dry farm tomatoes are so prized by chefs, growers, and serious food lovers. Dry farming shows us just how resilient tomato plants can be when they are encouraged to reach deep. It also teaches an important lesson about working with nature instead of constantly pampering it. Sometimes a little scarcity pushes a plant to use its deepest strength, and the result is not bigger, but better. And in a very human way, that reminds us that dry seasons do not always weaken us. Sometimes they concentrate our character, sharpen our purpose, and bring out the richest, strongest version of who we are. Part 8. The Ancient Secret. Olas and Deep Watering Solutions for the Modern Gardener. Now you may be thinking, I am not ready to stop watering completely and try dry farming, so how can I give my tomatoes steady, deep moisture without standing in the garden with a hose for half the day? The answer is an old one, and it has been used in different parts of the world for more than 4,000 years. The Ola. An Ola, pronounced Oya, is a simple unglazed terracotta clay pot. Because the clay is porous, it allows water to slowly move through its walls. You bury the Ola in the soil beside your tomato plant, leaving only the opening above ground, then fill it with water. The beauty of this method is how naturally it works. Water seeps out slowly only when the surrounding soil becomes dry enough to pull moisture from the clay. The tomato roots sense that steady source of water and grow toward it, often wrapping around the Ola as they draw moisture exactly when they need it. This kind of watering greatly reduces evaporation because the water is delivered underground, not sprayed across the surface. It also keeps the top layer of soil drier, which helps reduce weeds and lowers the risk of fungal disease. Most importantly, it provides the steady moisture that helps prevent splitting and blossom end rot. And you do not always need to buy an expensive Ola. A simple DIY version can be made by drilling tiny holes in a plastic jug and burying it beside the plant. Fill the jug in less than a minute, and the water slowly moves into the root zone over time. It is a quiet, hidden support system, feeding the plant from below where it matters most. Conclusion. So, my friends, it is time to step away from the daily evening sprinkle and rethink what good tomato care really means. The biggest mistake in the garden is not always a lack of effort. Sometimes it is caring in a way that keeps the plant weak instead of helping it grow strong. If you want healthier plants and a heavier tomato harvest, remember the core principles. Water deeply but not constantly. Water the soil, not the leaves. Use the finger test to understand what is really happening beneath the surface. Cover the root zone with a good layer of mulch. And whether you choose a drip line, a buried bottle, or an old terracotta Ola, send that moisture down to the deep roots where the plant can truly use it. The tomato plant teaches us a simple but powerful lesson. Real strength, lasting resilience, and the sweetest fruits do not come from shallow daily pampering. They come from deep roots, a steady foundation, and consistent support beneath the surface. Thank you for joining me today on Earthly Delights. I would love to hear from you. Have you been making the daily sprinkle mistake in your own garden? Would you try the buried Ola method this season? Share your experience and your gardening wisdom in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring, keep working with the soil, and remember, the deepest growth often happens where no one can see it. Happy gardening!